Alrighty, so week number 7 of the MLS season is upon us, and I can't believe it's already week number 7. I mean, we're already a little over a fifth into the new season, and what I like about this week is that not only we definitely have some very interesting and heavyweight matchup from match week number 7, but we also have some matchup between teams that are desperate in terms of getting their season back on track, or as I would like to say it, we definitely have a couple of desperation derby in terms of some of these games from match week number 7. But nevertheless, let us actually begin the first game, which some people have said that this could be a preview of the Eastern Conference Final between FC Cincinnati and the Philadelphia Union, because these are two teams that people have marked in the beginning of the season are the two that are probably going to be favorites of representing the Eastern Conference in MLS Cup. Now, as I said before, we're still way too early in the season to call this an Eastern Conference final preview, and especially with the way that the Union has kind of struggled in the beginning of the season, mostly due to them also balancing the CCL and MLS kind of act. FC Cincinnati themselves have not played relatively well either. I mean, I know they are first in the Eastern Conference, and I know their record is unbeaten, but as you kind of see what they have played in these last couple of games, and really in this season, they have not looked like the the potent FC Cincinnati team, especially on the attack, like we saw last season. And even Pat Nolan admits it too. Like even in the last game, he was not happy in terms of the performance that they had, despite they did get a win in the last game. But nevertheless, this is the first of 7:30, 4:30 p.m. Pacific starts. Cincinnati, as I mentioned, 4-2-0, while the Union 2-1-3. In terms of the all-time meeting, it's still heavily in favor of the Union, 6-2-1 in favor of them. But in the last five head-to-head matchup, both of these teams met in the playoffs. It was the Union getting the 1-0 win against FC Cincinnati. But prior to that, Cincinnati finally got their first win and probably one of the more dominant performance that we have seen, and maybe the most impressive performance we have seen in their franchise history, with a 3-1 win against the Union. But prior to that, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. The Union did win 2-0 against Cincinnati, and then the Union won 2-1 against Cincinnati in the first ever meeting. But that's back when Cincinnati was still considered to be a dumpster fire and the laughing stock in the league. So yeah, this should be an interesting kind of game, and especially for the Union. One thing I didn't mention in the review of the Union versus Atlas game is that they kind of rotated in that game against Atlas, which was a very strange thing because you would think that in that game, with how big it is for them facing against a Liga MX team and moving on into the semifinals of CCL, you would think they will go full gun blazing with the strongest starting 11, but no, Jim Kern decided to kind of. I mean, there is still a lot of players on that starting 11 that are regular starter, but there are a couple of guys that were in there that weren't regular starters. So I just wonder, did he maybe think about this game, thinking that, oh, this game is also an important game too, and especially with the way that the Union have struggled in the beginning of the season, does he think that, well, he can't just simply punt these game away? He needs to, of course, pick up points, because he probably have seen what other team have done where they punt these kind of game away and they just never recover in the second half of the season. We'll see whether or not, if that's kind of the thinking. But either way, this should be an interesting decision for Jim Kern to do, whether if he is going to put his strongest 11, and if he does, what is the starting 11 going to look like in that game against Atlas? Because I'm pretty sure that when they do play Atlas in that second leg of CCL, they're not going to go with the same starting 11 that did in the last game against Atlas. That was kind of a mixture of A and B kind of team from this Union team. Now, moving on, we got DC United versus the Columbus Crew. So in terms of the all-time meeting, both of these teams, they're original teams that came into the league since its inception, 38, 13, and 35 in favor of DC. DC so far, yeah, it's been kind of what you expect in terms of this season. It's been kind of a mixture of good and a mixture of bad. 1-2-3 is their record, while Columbus 3-1-2, and they are definitely probably the hottest team in terms of goal scoring. I mean, they have scored 10 goals in the last two games. No team has scored that many goals in the last two games, and they're looking to try to score some more in this one too, because they're facing against a DC team that, their defense has been a big issue in this one. Now, in terms of the last five head-to-head matchup, it was a 2-0 win Columbus had against DC before it was a 2-2 draw last time this game was at Audi Field. Columbus then win 3-0 against DC before Columbus did win 3-1 on the road against DC, and then DC did win on the road 4-2 against the Columbus Crew. And what's also kind of interesting for the Columbus Crew in this game, can they finally defeat their nemesis of able to get points or even get wins on the road? Because as great as Columbus has been in the last two games, both of those games were at home, and we know that their home form is very good, but the road form has always been a problem for this team, and that even in this season when they do face against the team that you would think that they should get wins against, and they don't. They play flat, and Wilfred Nancy, and it's kind of odd the fact that when Wilfred Nancy took over that Montreal job last season, his Montreal team were among the best road team in the league. I think they even broke the record for the most road win for the season. So you would think that would kind of translate with this Columbus team, but so far it hasn't happened. I mean, I think they have three road games so far this season, and they have not won any of them. So, this is an opportunity to do so, especially against a DC team that, again, it's just such a mixed bag with this team. There's been times where they have been good, but then there's times that they're just been very bad. And I think it's the other thing that, again, that's a big flaw of this team. They simply can't defend. I mean, I think they have given up the most goal out of any team in the league, and it's not a good feeling when you're about to face against a team that I think is right now leading the league in terms of goals scored. I mean, surely they have to with the way that they've been scoring so many goals in the last two games. But moving on in the next one, we got the national televised game between LAFC versus Austin. So just like last week, pretty much all of these games is going to be taking place in that mesh pit of games happening on Saturday night. Again, there's going to be people that's going to be complaining about that because of all the game taking place in such a short amount of period. I kind of are one of those because it's almost impossible for me to keep track of everyone. In fact, I'll probably just do what I did last week. I'll probably just ground hop. I'll definitely just watch the highlights in terms of some of these games because it's just pretty much almost impossible to keep track of anyone. Or at least I'll have MLS 360 in the background, at least hearing some of the things that happen in all of these games. But nevertheless, this game is on national television. It's LAFC versus Austin FC, the rematch of the Western Conference Final from last year. LAFC, of course, 3-2-0, while Austin 2-1-2. And really, both of these teams have kind of started their season in an opposite way. LAFC seems like they continue the momentum that they had last season into this one, having a great start to the season, while Austin, yeah, it's just have not been a great start to the season, and a lot of that has to be because of the biggest flaw of this team is started to really reel its ugly head, and of course, is the depth and also no defense on this team. But in terms of the all-time meeting, LAFC leads at 4-0-2, but the last five head-to-head matchup in the Western Conference Final, it was LAFC pretty comfortably beating Austin FC 3-0 at home. But then Austin probably had their best game in franchise history with a 4-1 win against LAFC. Before it was a 2-1 road win that Austin had against LAFC, and then LAFC did win 2-1 on the road before the first ever meeting between both of these teams is actually the first ever game for Austin FC, which they lost 2-0 on this one. So this fixture is definitely always going to be special for Austin FC fan, knowing the fact that this is the first team they ever face in their MLS existence. But yeah, this should be an interesting kind of matchup. Again, I do think that LAFC is going to be heavily favorites in this one, but we'll see whether they can carry that momentum that they had in CCL. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they're probably not going to rest a lot of guys heading in to that second leg because that second leg against Vancouver, I would assume it's pretty much all but done. So if they do put their strongest 11 again against this Austin team that we talk about, they have some huge issue in terms of defensive end and also on the attacking end. Not really a lot of players on that attacking end that is not named Driussi or Gallagher is doing anything to it. So this could be a rough game for Austin if they are thinking about getting revenge for that Western Conference final, and it doesn't help the fact that they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to go on the road to do so. But then again, they did surprise us last season. They were one of the few teams that was able to get wins at Bank of California Stadium. So you never know. Maybe Josh Wolf team might surprise us all, and that if they can get a win in this one, that will maybe have a chance to kind of turn around what has been. I wouldn't say it's been a horrendous start for them because they're at least still in the playoff position, but they just have not. Right, it doesn't feel like it's trending in the upward projectile, but more like the downward projectile with the way that they're dealing with injuries, and that it's now really started to kind of fully put the problem with this team, which is they don't have their best player. This team is a hollow shell of itself. But then moving on in the next match, we got Inter Miami versus FC Dallas. So believe it or not, this is actually the first ever meeting between both of these teams in Miami. Both of these teams, of course, played twice prior to this meeting, with Dallas winning one and drawing one. Miami 2-0-4, while Dallas 2-2-3. And in those two meetings, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, before Dallas did win the first ever meeting between both of these teams with a 2-1 win. So yeah, for Inter Miami, the good news is they're back at home, a place that theoretically they have been good so far this season. If you don't look at what happened in that game between them and the Chicago Fire, and for Dallas again, this is a team that it's been kind of an okay start. I mean, they're kind of in the same situation as Austin is where there's been times where they've been putting in some good performance, but then there's times where one of the issue for this team started to come back, where goal scoring hasn't really been lethal, especially of them not getting the best out of their attacking force that they have. And for Inter Miami, again, this is a team that the good news is I heard that it feels like Campana and Martinez is going to be back. Or well, at least Campana is going to be back. Martinez has been back for this team, but he's still snake bitten and just cannot score his 100 go in MLS. But now with both of those two strikers up front, which is something that Phil Neville has been wanted to do since the beginning of this season, it should be very interesting. I won't be surprised Inter Miami can get a win this one. I mean, they has to be desperate to get a win. I mean, after a promising start of the season, it has all gone wrong for Inter Miami. 4 straight loss coming in to this game against FC Dallas, that are looking to try to pick up points on the road once again. But now moving on in the next match, we got New England versus Montreal. So on paper, this should be an easy game for New England, who is 4-1-1 facing against a Montreal side that just got absolutely destroyed by Vancouver in the last game, and are probably the team that a lot of the fans in itself are already panicking about how the start of the season has been, with a 1-0-4 record. All-time meeting, New England with a 15-3-12 record over Montreal, and in the last 5 head-to-head matchup, New England actually lost the last time both of these teams play at Gillette Stadium. 1-0 was the scoreline in favor of Montreal. Before they win 4-0 against New England, but prior to that, it was a 4-1 road win that New England has against Montreal, a 2-1 home win against Montreal, and then another 2-1 home win against Montreal. I think one of those games, it happened in that play-in game that we saw in the COVID shortened season. But nevertheless, like I said, on paper, New England should easily win this game. And that, again, so far, I know a lot of Rams fans will want to say that they should be taken seriously because of how good the start of the season. Well, the problem why they haven't really been taken serious is because of the fact that they have a pretty easy schedule to start the season. And I will say that, at least for their part, they're doing what they needed to do. When you play against easy team, you need to, of course, win those. And we've seen even some of the best team not able to do so. But New England has done a great job to do so. And they have another chance to do it in this game against a struggling Montreal side that are just they're definitely looking like a team that probably is not going to make it to the playoffs, even though we're only into week 7 of the new season. Now, moving on, we got the New York Red Bulls versus the San Jose Earthquakes. So this was the home opener for the Quakes in the last game. It was not a memorable one because they lost 3-1 in that game against the Red Bulls, and now they gotta have to travel on the road this season against the Red Bulls. Although, the Red Bulls this season, again, it's been a slow start for them this season. 1-3-2 is the record, while the Quakes 3-1-2. All-time meeting, the Quakes still has the all-time meeting with an 18-9-16 record, but recently, the Red Bulls have dominated this head-to-head matchup. It was a 3-1 win, as I mentioned last year in the Quakes home opener. And then they won 4-1 at home against the Quakes. Then they won 3-1 again on the road against the Quakes before destroying the Quakes 5-1 back in 2017. And then the last time the Quakes were able to beat the Red Bulls, it was all the way back in 2016 when they won 2-0 at home against the Red Bulls. And one of the things that I don't think this will favor the Quakes. Is not just because they're playing on the road, which anytime when the Quakes are playing on the road, it's usually an automatic L because this is a team that is not a good road team and it never has been a good road team. But also with the way that they're once again playing the same type of game that they face against St. Louis, a team that is high pressing, which I think Luchi Gonzalez really struggled to deal with that in that game against St. Louis. And now the Red Bulls are playing that kind of same style of soccer. I wonder how Luchi Gonzalez is going to adjust that because, again, they cannot look like they were against St. Louis. If they were, I won't be surprised this is going to be a loss for the Quakes in this one. But again, for the Red Bulls, they desperately need points because this has not been a season that Red Bulls fan were hoping that it would end up to be. And I think myself included, I thought this team was going to have a good regular season, but it's just been a slow start coming out of the gate. But now moving on, in the next match, we'll talk about their intercity rival, NYCFC. They play against Atlanta United. So again, theoretically, this is another kind of a heavyweight matchup. Although, again, NYCFC has been kind of inconsistent a little bit this season. But the good news is they're playing at Yankee Stadium, or at least I think they're playing at Yankee Stadium. I might be wrong. They might play at Citi Field in this one. By the way, they're definitely playing in a baseball stadium against Atlanta United, who has a 4-1-1 record. All-time meeting 5-4-4 in favor of NYCFC. The last five head-to-head matchup, it was NYCFC winning 2-1 against Atlanta before it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams. NYCFC did win 2-0 against Atlanta, a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, and then NYCFC winning 1-0 against Atlanta United. So safe to say the NYCFC have kind of owned this head-to-head meeting against Atlanta, and that again, if they are playing at Yankee Stadium, they will have a huge advantage because again, teams have not been able to deal with the narrow field that we or the narrow pitch that we see at Yankee Stadium, and it just feels like it fits the perfect style that NYCFC want to play, and we'll see whether or not if Atlanta United can adapt to it. Because as much as they have a really good record, Yankee Stadium seems to be always been a graveyard in terms of getting points for opposition, and that NYCFC is looking to try to take advantage of that by getting their third win of the season. But nevertheless, moving on into the last game on this board, we got the Chicago Fire versus Minnesota United, and this is kind of an interesting one because this is kind of maybe a preview in terms of the League Cup matchup that both of these teams, of course, will face against each other because they're both in the same group. And I know there's going to be some MLS media and certain selective MLS media are going to say this is going to be a rivalry game because both of these teams are not separated by very far. And in terms of other sports in general, I mean, in hockey, that there's going to be a rivalry between the Wild and the Blackhawks, and especially in football too. There's going to be a rivalry between the Vikings and the Bears. But, because of the way that both of these teams are in different conference, you don't really quite get that rivalry sake. But that being said, I think the real rivalry in this game is who is going to be the one that will score the one goal that is going to win the game, because that's been kind of how the Loons has been playing this season. I mean, without Reynoso this season, this is a team that clearly are playing that bunker and bend don't break kind of style, and also just do enough on the attacking end to grind out result. Well, they're facing against another team like the Chicago Fire that, this season it's been kind of almost hit and miss in terms of the attack. It's been mostly miss, though. I mean, they haven't really done well on the attacking end, but on the defensive end, at least for the most part, they have done relatively well this season. So, again, like I said, when you have that kind of factor, it seems like this might be one of those games where don't be surprised if this game end 0-0 or it might end 1-0 in favor of one of these teams. But this is going to be one of, I believe, four games that's going to be starting at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. In terms of the all-time meeting, Minnesota has pretty much dominated the recent all-time meeting, 3-1-1 over the Chicago Fire. In fact, last year, both of these teams actually faced off against each other, and it was the Loons getting a 3-0 win against the Fire before getting a 2-0 win against the Fire. The Fire did get their lone win against Minnesota, 2-0 at home. But before that, the Loons did get a 2-1 win against the Chicago Fire. And in the first ever meeting, Minnesota won 2-1 against the Chicago Fire. So again, yeah, this is a matchup should be very interesting to watch if you don't mind the fact that it could be a bit of a slow game. I mean, as a Loons fan, I mean, as much as it can be very a little bit frustrating at times seeing this team play, especially the lack of attacking quality, I don't mind the fact that if they do that. Like again, sometimes you can have see teams that play ugly soccer and they still get resort, and that's what Minnesota has been able to done, and that's probably what they're going to have to continue to do until Reynoso eventually would come back, right? I mean, it's not like we didn't hear anything about Reynoso and the relationship going on between him and Minnesota. I mean, surely he's gonna come back to this team, right? Someday, yeah. But either way, I'm now going to switch boards and look at the last 6 games that's going to happen in terms of match week number 7. So moving on, we got the Houston Dynamo versus the LA Galaxy. As the Dynamo trying to bounce back after a tough loss that they have against the Quakes with a 2-0-3 record, while the Galaxy, yeah, they're in desperation mode. They're still searching for their first win of the season with an 0-3-2 record. In terms of the all-time meetings, 16, 10, and 13 over the Houston Dynamo. And I will say this, recently, at least in the last couple of games or so, at least the Galaxy have sort of figured out the Houston Dynamo, because I've said before, I think a couple of years, this used to be a team that the Galaxy hate facing against, because this is the team that always gave them heartbreaks in decision day, and them not able to get all 3 points. But recently they have done better against the Dynamo, especially when this game is on the road. They did win 3-1 on the road against Houston, but the game at home, yeah, let's not talk about that if you're a Galaxy fan. They lost 3-0 in that one. But then they did win 3-0 on the road against Houston. It was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, and then another 1-1 draw between both of these teams. So, yeah, again, the Galaxy, they're desperate to try to get points in this one, and it's not going to be easy, because even though they have been having a decent record in terms of the last couple of games when they're playing them on the road. The Dynamo so far has been perfect at home. But the even better news for the Galaxy is that I believe Chicharito will be back as soon as this week. And yeah, it's safe to say that they desperately miss Chicharito because of the lack of finishing in terms of this team has been having problem for the last couple of games, or not even the last couple of games, but pretty much that's been the season sums up for the Galaxy. Speaking of lack of finishing, that also sums up the season. You can say the same thing about Sporting KC, and I would say that this is basically a desperation derby between them and the Colorado Rapids, because both of these teams are actually in the bottom two spot in the Western Conference. So already we have an early wooden spoon kind of derby in the Western Conference between both of these teams, and both of these teams have identical record, 0-3-3. Although I will say that in terms of looking at both of these teams, at least one team are kind of started heading into a positive direction. I think the Rapids, yes, they're still searching their first win, but the last couple of games, they have definitely played much better, and you could argue they probably were a little unlucky to not get their first win, judging how they play in the last 2 games. Whereas for Sporting KC, yeah, it's been a miserable start to the season for them, and again, finishing has been a huge problem with this team. But the good news is that on the last game they did see Johnny Russell back, and I think Polito is also back in this team, so they're gonna definitely get some help in terms of the attacking front, and they just hope that those two guys can solve the issue that they have with just not being able to be clinical in front of goal. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, 35, 21, and 27 over the Rapids that Sporting KC has in the all-time meeting. Last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams, a 2-1 win that they had against the Colorado Rapids. By the way, this I think is one of the first meeting from this season that both of these teams have already faced off against each other. And again, that uh, I forgot to mention the fact that both of these teams face off in match week number 2, and that was a game where Sporting KC had like 27 shots in the game, and they still aren't able to put it into the net, and also unable to solve William Yarbrough, because Yarbrough made like 11 save in that one. But other than that, going back to the last 5 head-to-head matchup, Colorado did win 2-0 against Sporting KC, and then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, and then a 0-0 draw between both of these teams. So, like I said, both of these teams are desperate to get a win, and we'll see whether or not if one of these teams is going to finally get a win. I mean, that's all. That's why I love these kind of desperation derby or wooden spoon derby, where you think that this game could be a little bit boring, but don't be surprised. Both of these teams will be desperate to get a win. And if this game does end in a draw, I guarantee you neither of these teams is going to be happy with the result as they're still searching for their first win of the season. That being said, moving on in the next match, we got Nashville versus Toronto FC. So Nashville kind of ride the ship a little bit after getting a win in the last one with a 3-1-2 record while they're facing against a TFC team that, they actually have one of the longest unbeaten run in the league so far this season. But again, it feels like it's a glass half empty kind of 5 game unbeaten run with 4 of them being a draw, and they've only been getting 1 win out of those 5 games that they've been unbeaten with a 1-4-1 record. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, there's been 2 wins for both of these team apiece and 1 draw. And in the last 5 head-to-head matchup, boy, it was an exciting matchup between both of the team, with Toronto winning 4-3 against Nashville. Then TFC win 2-1 against Nashville before it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. Then Nashville won 3-2 against TFC, and in the very first ever meeting between both of these teams actually happened in the playoffs, with Nashville winning in that one, and that always will be a memorable game because that was the first game that Nashville SC was able to win it in the playoffs. And I know, yes, they did win against Inter Miami in the play-in, but we're talking about proper playoffs here. We're not talking about the play-in round. So yeah, this should be an interesting kind of game to see whether or not if Nashville, this season, I will say that Nashville has definitely done much better at home, which has been a huge Achilles heel for them last season, and we'll see whether they can continue that against a TFC team that, again, I will say that at least, even though it's kind of frustrating with the amount of draws that they had. They're trying to just stay afloat with the way that they're still dealing with a lot of injuries, and that, I think eventually Lorenzo Insigne is going to come back to this team, and once they do come back, and also a couple of those guys that is currently on the IR is back in this team, I would think this team should be getting themselves back pushing above the red line, but we'll see whether or not if that's going to be the case. But now moving on in the next match, we get to another desperation derby between RSL versus Charlotte FC, as this game will be happening at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And this, of course, is the first ever meeting between both of these teams. It's kind of interesting that the first ever meeting between both of these teams happens to be a game that both of these teams desperately need to win. I mean, RSL, besides that one game that they had against Vancouver where they were winning on the road, it has been nothing but disaster for them the rest of the way. Whereas they play against a Charlotte FC team that, I mean, you could say that Charlotte has played a little bit better compared to the start of the season. After all, I think they did lose their first free game of the season, but ever since they have not lost a single game. So, yeah, I would say that this is a game that, I would say that if there is a team that is more desperate to win, and I didn't even mention about this game who is probably more desperate, I think it's got to be Sporting KC because they're the home team. And the same goes with this one. I mean, for RSL, they got to stop the bleeding this season. And I think there's definitely also pressure on Pablo Mastroeni too, because I think in the last game it was very strange to see him decided to put a reserve out of the team. I mean, it's not because they had a CCL game, but he just decided to put the reserve. Again, I don't know why he decided to do that. Maybe send a message to the rest of the team that, hey, if you're not good enough, I'm going to play the next man. And unfortunately, his reserve didn't really respond well, and they lost that game too. So yeah, it should be an interesting situation to see what kind of starting 11 Pablo Mastroeni is going to roll out, and especially, again, I know there's one way for him to send message to some of his starters that is underperforming, but that's also a way to kind of damage the relationship between players. The fact that they're going to be upset, the fact that they decided they were being benched by players that didn't even play well either. On the other hand, so we'll see how they, of course, will respond in this game against Charlotte FC. And like I said, it's Charlotte, they have definitely look a little bit better, but we'll see whether or not if they can continue of them start to kind of turn the ship around after just a disastrous start to the season. But moving on, we got Seattle versus the St. Louis City, and if you would have told me this is a battle between the top 2 teams in the Western Conference in the beginning of the season, I would think you're absolutely nuts. But here we are. This is the battle between the top 2 teams, and this should be a very interesting game to see for St. Louis because they are fresh off of their first loss of the season, and now for the first time they do face adversity coming off of a loss. it'll be very interesting to see how they respond. Now, unfortunately, they do have the daunting task to have to go into Seattle to play against the Sounders. But I will say that if there is one thing that can give St. Louis the edge in this one, is the fact that maybe Seattle might play right in the hands of St. Louis City, because so far this season, I think the Sounders has been more of a possession team, and they're kind of a team that likes to have the ball and trying to kind of build up, kind of similar to what we see some of the bigger team in Europe decide to do, where they want all the possession and they'll find a way to cut open a relatively weak defense. Whereas that kind of play right in the hand of St. Louis, because they want to be that pressing team. They want to force Seattle to have the possession and actually make them to commit a mistake. And that, yeah, this could be a game that don't be surprised if St. Louis can pull off a big upset. If they can do so, I think all that hype about the start of the season, it's gonna come back. And that I will also say that, as much as I know this is the first time they're facing adversity in terms of coming off losses, it's the first time they face adversity this season. When you look at some of those results that they have, especially early in the season when they had to come back to win, they have faced adversity against Austin going behind, and then face adversity against the Timbers going behind early. So, for the Sounders, they should not be underestimating the St. Louis team. But either way, it should be a very interesting matchup. Again, this is another matchup between two teams that have never met against each other, and that, if the MLS people that can redo the TV schedule, I would say that they definitely should have put this one as national televised, because again, you don't usually see a battle between the top two teams in a match week in either of the conference. And again, this is one that I don't think anybody saw coming as the battle between the top two teams, but it should be a heck of a battle between St. Louis and the Seattle Sounders. And then finally, in the last game, we got the Vancouver Whitecaps versus the Portland Timbers. So I would like to say that this is kind of the forgotten Cascadia Derby, because, anytime when we talk about the Cascadia Derby, it's always Portland versus Seattle. But whenever Vancouver play either Portland or Seattle, it's kind of the forgotten Cascadia Derby. But coming into this game, Vancouver, surprisingly, they're actually above the red line. I mean, yes, they're just barely above the red line with them being in ninth place with a 1-3-2 record. While for the Portland Timbers, I mean, how should I say it? I think it's kind of gone a little bit better for this Timber side. I mean, they're still searching for their first win since the opening weekend of the MLS season, but at least they have not looked as terrible as what we saw when they were just being dominated, and especially really that low point was that 5-1 loss against Atlanta United. But nevertheless, 1-2-3 is the record. In terms of the all-time meeting, the Timbers does leads the all-time meeting 16-8-9. Last five head-to-head matchup, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams before the Timbers did win 3-2 against Vancouver. Then it was a 3-2 win that Vancouver had against the Portland Timbers before the Timbers did win 1-0 on the road against Vancouver, and then Vancouver winning 1-0 against the Portland Timbers. And it's also interesting to say that, BC plays is still a place that is hard for teams to get real wins. But if there's one teams that have been recently have relatively good success when they're playing against the Whitecaps at BC Place, it's the Portland Timbers. They have got a couple of wins on the road against this Whitecaps team on the road. So again, don't be surprised if that could be the case again, and especially against a Whitecaps team that they want to bounce back coming into this one. I mean, after that disastrous first leg game against LAFC, that looks like pretty much put the end of their hope in terms of a long CCL run. I mean, not that if they were thinking that they would go on a deep run, but that probably is one that kind of done the two-legged tie between the all MLS matchup between them and LAFC. So I think Vinny Tartini is going to empty the arsenal. He's going to go with his strongest team in this one, and we'll see if they can get a win in this one. Because again, after last week when they finally got their first win of the season in an emphatic fashion, we'll see whether they can follow that up in this game against the Portland Timbers. But there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of the preview for all 14 of these games that's happening in match week number 7. Like I said, there are some very interesting games and a lot of variety kind of game. I mean, if you want to watch some heavyweight matchup, we definitely had some. If you want to watch a game between two teams that desperately need to turn around their season, we have that too in terms of this week. But either way, let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and most importantly, let me know in the comments below your prediction for all 14 of these games that's going to be happening in match week number 7. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.